Hi, I'm Dr. Lindsey. I'd like to present a case to you. This is a 45-year-old Iranian surgeon who got 3,000 grafts 20 months ago. So this fellow walked in with still some decent hair in the front, but significant thinning in the front third of his head. Going for him is that his donor area is virtually unlimited. In fact, I would bet that most cases that we do, when I review the pictures after the end of the case with the patient of the day, I'll show them what their strip looked like, and then a lot of people say, well, is that a good strip or a bad strip? And I have some other examples, and I use this fellow, or at least his donor strip, as an example of really the perfect donor area. It's thick, coarse hair, it's got a little salt and pepper color to it, and there's just so much hair you can hardly see the skin. In fact, we'd hoped to get about 2,500 grafts, and we got 3,000, even cutting within the lines. Now, if you look at these pictures, he's thinning a little further back, so we put all those grafts in. He's essentially got an infinite supply of donor hair. A good problem to have. Going against him, however, is he's really fair-skinned, significantly fairer skinned than me, and he spends, as a general surgeon, spends all his time inside, so he doesn't get any suntan. But compared to his really dark hairs that aren't salt and peppered yet, he definitely has a color contrast. That'll fix itself as he gets older, like me. So he and his wife and I discussed his options, including doing nothing. He really looked unremarkable, or doing a hair transplant. And he's got the genes that suggest he may need to have another one down the road, so we thought we'd be reasonably conservative with his hairline. If you look carefully, he's got some straggler hairs below our plan. You could say, well, why not put hair all the way down to there? Well, as he gets older, that might look a little too low. And there's not that many hairs there that would warrant bringing the hairline down and looking unusual after the case is done. Now, a few of those hairs are still there at his end result, and so some people might say, well, gosh, there's a few hairs down here. He didn't put enough hair. Those are hairs that he had when he came in. So we took this strip out of him, and here's a close-up. I mean, it is just hair everywhere. And remember, the hair grows like dandelions or crepe myrtles. There's some grafts that have one hair in them, and some that have two, and some that have three or four. And frequently, in the 2s and 3s and 4s, if you look carefully under the microscope, you'll see a resting follicle in there. So it's even thicker than you think. That's one advantage of FUT over FUE, is that by having a little extra tissue amongst the roots, frequently there's an extra hair that's going to grow out of there when the rest cycle's over. I sewed him up with a 2-layered trichophytic closure. Trichophytic means hair preserving or hair loving, and it was a closure designed by facial plastic surgeons. I'm a facial plastic surgeon, mainly for brow lifts. And so when we do those type of closures, what happens is the doctor makes a cut. Instead of cutting straight into the scalp, you make a cut like this, across this, and leave the hair roots down here. And then after the closure, the hair roots tend to grow across the scar line. And that's a great option for brow lifts, so that you don't have a straight white line at the hairline. I've probably done about 120 brow lifts, and the brow is a particularly forgiving area to do this scar in, and results in a really good scar that's difficult to find. And this technique was adopted by hair transplant surgeons, I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago. A lot of people say they do it. I think to do it correctly, you do need some experience, in that you need experience putting in deep stitches. Here's the skin edges that hold the skin together down low, and that's called the dermis, so that the scar doesn't widen out after the stitches are, and then stitches that are placed in the skin. And we leave those in about 6 days usually. And then when we take those out, the deep stitches are holding the load off of the incision so it doesn't pull apart. In general, if you don't do a deep stitch, when you take those skin stitches out, if it's too early, then the scar will widen out. And if you leave this skin stitches in long enough so that everything heals together like that, that you don't need deep stitches, it often leaves needle marks in the skin. So that's what a trichophytic closure is. Next, we trim down the recipient area, and if you don't trim those hairs down, I can't see to make holes tight enough that when those other hairs go away that you got enough hair put in there. The ladies that are putting the hairs in can't work around those hairs that you got on the top that are still in the recipient area, and they end up not getting some hairs in. Those hairs can stick, the native hairs, if you don't trim them, will stick to the new grafts and pull them out. And you tend not to put enough hair in there so that when the hairs that are kind of on their last leg go away, it looks like kind of a half-assed hair transplant was done. So that's why we trim people, and then we make the holes as tightly as we can, and then the hairs are put in. And if you look at this, it's really tight. Now remember that just like when you plant a tree or a bush, you leave the root up just a little bit, and then it sinks down over the course of a week or two if it's a plant, or a day or two if it's a hair graft. And so those those white dots are just a little bit at the top of the dermis. They'll all sink down. He did a great job cleaning, and here he is on day 6, and then his stitches are out. Now notice he had a really short haircut. I would advise most people to keep their hair, I don't know, an inch long in the back to conceal the scar, because there's almost always a little shock loss around the scar, sometime around 6 weeks or so. But he, as a surgeon, he just put his Dr. Buffon hat on and wore that in the clinic and the operating room, and nobody knew that he had anything done. And I asked him to send me a picture at 6 weeks or to call, and I didn't hear anything until about 4 days ago when he called and said he had a little time on his hands and he'd like to come over and show me how he turned out. So he walked in and he looked like this. And that, in my mind, is a wall of hair. And it's an unremarkable looking hairline. He does not look like he had a hair transplant. There's still those few stragglers out in front that'll eventually go away. His donor scar with a short haircut is difficult to see, and then with the hair pulled up so you can see it, that's a great donor scar. This fella heals superbly. And we did this brief video. All right, here we're with Dr. Steve. How old a fellow are you, sir?
47.
And I've shown your strip to 200 people since I did your case, because you have literally the best hair on the planet to work with. I mean, in that it's thick, other than the color contrast, which will go away as you start worrying about kids and stuff. I mean, it's just awesome hair. And we did your whole front. Your before pictures are up to your right side. Any kind of bullshit I pulled on you, sir? You're a surgeon.
None.
And how much did the whole thing hurt?
None. I couldn't.
And we're now at 20 months out from this, and I think you look fantastic, and it'll be interesting to see what people say as the comments. But because of your color contrast, yeah, you could scrutinize and say, hey man, maybe we should put some hair there, but it's my old rule, perfection's the enemy of good. You've heard that in surgery, right, sir?
Absolutely.
Do we do that or not? And we'll think about, I'll let you decide, make a decision, but
I'm pretty happy.
Yeah. Anything you can think of, doctor, that people should consider before they have a hair transplant?
I think they should find an expert and come and see you.
Okay, and lastly, that hairline looks unremarkable, meaning it's not a straight line, right? And you were just commenting in the other room that you like the fact that it was just a bit random, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very natural.
All right, well, thank you so much for coming to visit me today. So in conclusion, if you've got the right donor hair, meaning thick, bushy, wiry hairs with great roots, you can essentially spin your donor hair however you want to. He'll never run out. We could start his hairline down at his eyebrows and he'd still have plenty of hair. It's an immense amount of donor hair, but most people do not have that. In fact, in my 29 years and 1 month of working on hairs, he and one other fellow are the two guys that are my go-to. This is what a good strip looks like. And I can count 10 people that I've dealt with that have donor areas like this. So most people don't have this, and so you, the potential customer, need to realize that your donor area is really what limits your ability to conceal your baldness. If you've got infinite donor's blood, do whatever you want. You can FUE, you can strip it, you can put your hairline kind of wherever you want to. If you're the typical patient and you have average donor hair, then you need to spend it somewhat frugally so that you have enough hair to frame your face and deal with your crown and get a good result on whatever the problem is you want to do. But spend your hair frugally. You can steal a bank, or you can rob a bank and get more money. This is the finite amount of resources that you have to work with. And if you're a patient with a poor donor area, make sure you and your doctor talk about this before your surgery and come up with a plan. And that plan might be no surgery. And come up with a plan to spend your hair efficiently. I got a letter from a veteran yesterday who probably was not a candidate to begin with, who'd gotten done at a local clinic, and he now has a hair disaster that will probably force him to wear a hat for the rest of his life. And I said, listen, I don't think you were probably a candidate to begin with. Didn't they talk to you about that? And he said, no. They said now this is him saying, they said he was a good candidate. I wasn't there, but I hear that enough times that I suspect salespeople say what they need to in order to get that commission. So educate yourself. Make sure you spend your hair frugally. Make sure that the doctor you're going to has a track record of cases with hairs like you have. It's easy to put up 2 or 3 fellows like this guy and tell everybody that that's what they're going to get, but it really depends on what you have to work with. If we can help you, please give us a call. Thanks.